And they looked at me and said, we're not wanting you to live up to our expectations of you. We're wanting you to lift us up to the expectations you have of what community looks like with Christian people in leadership positions. That kind of surprised me. Find the place where you're comfortable. Go do what you can do. Don't look around to say what you can't do, but find what you can do and then do it.
Welcome to the Christian Citizen, part of the ministry of U.S. Pastor Council. We take head on the mission of restoring godly citizenship as an effective ministry of the local Bible-believing pastor and church. Man calls it politics, but God calls it ministry, and our mission of, by, and for pastors is to bring a united biblical voice to the critical issues of our day. Scripture speaks to all issues impacting lives, and so should our pulpits. Join us for today's program. Hi, I'm Dave Welch, the founder and president of the Texas Pastor Council and the host of the Christian Citizen podcast. We are a ministry of, by, and for pastors to encourage pastors to equip our congregations and lead our congregations to effective biblical citizenship. And our role here in the podcast is just to find ways to bring additional resources and information to pastors and to lead their churches to make disciples, build strong biblical churches and believers, but also to take seriously the biblical mandate that we've been given since Genesis to be good stewards of our creation. And in our case, in our country, that also, again, means being good citizens. To address that here, we have a unique opportunity. We have a pastor on who has stepped out of the walls of his church, if you will, and assumed another set of responsibilities in his city. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about that today. So I'd like to welcome Ron Humphrey from New Boston, Texas, who is also the mayor of New Boston. Welcome, Pastor Ron.
I'm glad to be with you, Dave. I've been looking forward to this, to talk about what God has done here with us and encourage other people to get involved in the same way. It's not something that should be unique. It's something that should be every pastor who has any desire at all for biblical citizenship, biblical involvement in the community. We should be looking for ways to engage in our communities.
Well, absolutely. Well, Ron, for folks in other parts of Texas or outside of Texas, where is New Boston?
New Boston is in the northeast corner of Texas. We're 22 miles west of Texarkana, right on Interstate 30. Interstate 30 is right outside our church door here. So we're just 22 miles west of Texarkana in the piney woods of East Texas.
It's beautiful, beautiful country, by the way. And being a native of Washington State, where we're known for the mountains and the trees and all that up there, I love coming up to that part of East Texas.
Yeah, we appreciate it when you came up. You've actually been in our church before in a pastor's meeting, and we appreciated you sharing the ministry with us, and our city pastors involved enjoyed hearing what you shared with them.
Well, Ron, you stepped out. What's back from the beginning of the point? Now, you were elected as mayor, in 2020, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And so let's back up before 2020. What was it that kind of got you to the point you said, well, you know what, I'm gonna run? What led you to that point?
In 2008, 2009. I was an elder at the church we were a part of at that time in Texarkana, Church on the Rock. And our pastor was always encouraging his leaders to get involved in the community and to get involved in local government, either city councils, school boards, some way to affect the local community. Because like we all realize, as a pastor of a church, we reach a very small part of our community. But when you step out into the community in one of those roles, then, you do affect a lot more of the community. And so that had been kind of underneath the surface. Then he planted us here, the church here. We were planted in 2012. And I started getting involved, going to council meetings, talking to different city officials. The mayor that was here at that time, I'd known him most of my life. New Boston's kind of unique. We have pictures of all of the mayors on the wall in our council chambers. And since 1964, I'm only the fourth mayor. So Mayors here generally serve long terms. And so I visited with him a lot, asked him how we could help in the community. And then there was kind of a little bit of a turmoil in the city. There was a personnel issue at City Hall. And so in the process of that next election, the city council pretty much turned over and there was 40 members elected. And then the next election cycle, the mayor's seat was up for election. And the mayor had told me he wasn't going to run. And so I had some men come to me in the community and they said, "Why don't you run for mayor?" And, I kind of cut up with them some. And I said, there's enough that's true about me. I don't want people making up stuff that add to what's already true. So I said, I'm just afraid that I couldn't live up to your expectations of what you would want from me in that role. And they looked at me and said, "We're not wanting you to live up to our expectations of you. We're wanting you to lift us up to the expectations you have of what community looks like with Christian people in leadership positions." And so that sealed the deal in my heart that I was supposed to run. The elections, like Texas city elections, are normally in May. You sign up in February, and so you've got a couple of months of running and politicking, I guess you could say. But that year, 2020, of course, the COVID year, they put the election off until November. And so the election was held in conjunction with the national election. And there were 3 people that ran, and I was elected. And so I've been in office since November of 2020.
And then you were just reelected then in 2024?
Reelected in 22. They're 2-year terms.
Okay.
Well, I was actually, no one has run against me since I was elected in 2020. So,
well, that's a great testimony. What have you learned and found as in that role as mayor that both kind of affirms why you're there, but some things that may have surprised you a bit as well?
The role is not a whole lot different than that of a pastor. It's just kind of a larger congregation. Instead of a couple of hundred people as a congregation, you got a few thousand. And so, that kind of surprised me that there wasn't a whole lot of difference in that part of it. You were ministering to people's needs and doing what you could to meet people's needs. Now, in our city, we have a city administrator. And so one of the things that surprised me a little bit was that as a mayor in a town with a city administrator form of government, the mayor has very little authority, just a lot of influence. And so I've had to realize that my biggest role now is to influence people in the community to desire to see godly community, godly laws and ordinances passed, and flowing after the things of God in the community. I went to a meeting. The Texas Municipal League is a group of city officials that kind of go in to work in Austin and deal with state legislature. And I got elected to be regional first vice president and now president of TML Region 15. And there had been someone tell us one time that they felt like we had a prayer influence in a region of East Texas, and they actually even showed us a map of that region of East Texas. And when I compared the map they had showed us of the prayer influence that we had, it was almost, except for 2 counties, one county that was in the prayer map was not in the Region 15 map, and one county that was in Region 15 was not in the prayer map. So I just felt like that confirmed a region where we had been given some prayer authority. And just seeing how everything that seemed to be happening in the office of mayor and then in this region, TML region, it just confirmed to me that this is where God has me, at least for a season. And it's been, we started 2024 off with, I felt impressed to the Lord that we were to have 36 days of prayer, kind of as a tithe of the number of days in the year. 36 days of prayer in the community center and city hall. We did. And then this year we increased that to 50 days. And we've been amazed at how the city there's been some turnaround in attitudes in the city. There's been a turnaround of some of the opposition that had been in our city just against city government. In a town this size, you always got that little contrarian coordinate. And so they've quieted down quite a bit. And we've just seen God move in a mighty way. And we've held nights of worship in our city pavilion. And it's been an amazing time to watch what God has done.
That was powerful. So have you had a good collaboration with the other pastors in the city, staying connected and working on those and other, city needs? How's that worked out?
Yeah, we really have. There is a local ministerial alliance, and I had been a part of that for some time. And so that's continued, and the pastors want to work together. At first wondered about having one of their own as mayor. One of the pastors here in town said something to me. He said, "Well, how's it going as mayor?" And I said, "Well, if it wasn't for the city council members that are in your church that are causing problems, things would be okay." And he said, "Well, they're probably the same people that are doing that in my church." So,
yeah.
But pastors here are more united than in a lot of cities we've been in, and we see a lot of good things happen among the collaboration.
Well, that's the key thing. It seems like, obviously that's a part of Texas where there's a strong foundation, the cultural level of church and integrated faith that is evident in everything that flows outward from it. Obviously, you've got the legislators and senators that come out of that region. Some of our strongest, like Brian Hughes and others. And, it's amazing to Senator Hughes in political meetings that I've seen him in and do. He does a better job of presenting the gospel in a more clear fashion than most pastors I know.
I've met with Senator Hughes on a couple of occasions. Yeah. He is a true man of faith.
One of the things that it's important, and we're part of our messaging to our pastors, is that while we have political responsibilities and civic duties to vote and those things, which we obviously believe very strongly, it's also, though, a flow from what we're doing at the heart level. And if the people of the community and the city are anti or hostile to things of Christ and our faith and our principles, then it's going to be, as is the case in many parts of the country, we well know. But it's encouraging, and I think, and to me, enlightening for pastors and others to see that when those things are in order and we elect godly leaders, then we can get good things done that are actually beneficial and positive for the city. And that's an important part. There's always differences of opinion. I mean, I think one of our pastors said, I'll pick on Baptists for a minute. He said, you put 10 Baptists in a room, you'll have 15 opinions. But we probably say 10 Christians in a room, and you'll have 15 opinions across. Yeah. So that's nothing unusual to have, but to have the opportunity. What are some things that just basic, for example, quality of life, infrastructure things in the city that you have been able to do in that role that have been a positive direction for the city that shows what we can do when we are in those roles?
We have really worked hard to increase the employment base around us. When I say we, it is a definite we. We have a very active industrial development commission that goes out and seeks employers to come into our region. And so we've seen them work hard, and we've worked with them at the city to try to provide them with infrastructure improvements, sewer, water, streets, so that if they choose to locate here, some of these larger employers, that, we will be ready for them when they come. We've got a couple of projects in the works that we're told that when they are fully developed could employ about 6,000 people, and we're a town of 4,600. So, not all of them will live here. We're not that far from Texarkana. There are a lot of other communities around us that are great communities, but, we'll get a lot of those because those businesses are right here. And so we see the possibility of doubling our community size within just the next few years based on these projects that are in the works. And a couple of them, from what we've been told, are very solid and should be, one of them operational within 2 years and one within about 3 to 4. Yesterday, I was a part of the Ministerial Alliance goes to the day that the seniors in high school practice for graduation. The school entices them to come to that practice by having the Ministerial Alliance provide them a breakfast. And so we were there yesterday at the high school. And, I told those students, I said, you're one of the first graduating classes, if not the first, that the job market here will include jobs that will be in the same salary structure as those that right now you're probably thinking you're going to have to move away 2 to 3 hours. But these projects that are coming in should improve our community life to the point to where there will be the professional jobs right here within our community. And those kids can come back because a lot of them graduate high school, go away to college, and then because the job market here has not been that strong, they're not able to come back and have the quality of life they've wanted. But I believe we're at a place right now where within the next 5 years, any graduating senior from this high school that wants to come home will have those opportunities with high-paying jobs.
That's phenomenal. And the Texas Pastor Council, we're having our spring luncheon benefit next week. And so I was putting together our ministry update. And as you know, whether it's a church, whether it's a ministry, you're always trying to take 3 pounds of sausage and putting it in a 1 pound package and trying to tell what you do in a short time is always a challenge. But the Lord brought me down to just 2 pictures. And my update is going to be, and for the city, especially for our Harris County core team, which we founded 22 years ago, is a picture from 2014, one of our epic pictures of 1,000 pastors and people around City Hall. And we had to take on the mayor of Houston and defeat this hero ordinance, they called it, which is the LGBTQ, which would have allowed men and women's restrooms, criminalized Christian business owners, and the whole bit. And so that picture really is one of our historical moments. But then actually a week ago, the second picture, this whole slideshow is 2014, this picture. Now it's 2025. And here's the picture. It's a picture of 30 of our lead pastors from around the city, of all colors, corners of the city, meeting with the mayor in the conference room in the city hall, collaborating with the mayor on the major issues and crisis issues of the city and how we can help. And what the messaging there is, if we're out there doing what God called us to do, we come together, and stay involved and stay on the field, then God can move us from fighting City Hall to being in City Hall. And that's what we've seen happen even in Houston, because of the faithfulness of these pastors who stayed on the field. And that's really our charge going forward, really, isn't it? We're all here for a season, but the terrible often is that when we react to crises a lot easier than we do to the mundane issues of regular stewardship. We love to look at a nicely mowed lawn, but I don't know about you, but I don't care to mow the lawn. I got to do it anyway. So that work, but it's our work of what we're doing to change lives, change hearts, change families through Christ, and bring that redemptive power of that transformation and the principles it brings into lives out that flow into the community. But it's interesting how, though, the infrastructure of government seems to be one of the central points of the enemy's attacks, of what he wants to seize that power, because he recognizes he can use it to steal, kill, and destroy. So we can never take for granted, and especially one of the things we're trying to be very careful about is when we have men like you step up in those roles, you've got to make sure we're covering you with prayer and your family, and just that God will keep you, protect you, and guide you in it, because the enemy's not going to let go unnoticed when we have the godly in authority.
Well, I appreciate that. And, here in our local church, we've got about 200 members, and we have one New Boston school board, one school board member of the city right down the street. I've got 3, I think, people that serve on commissions or boards within the city. And they're always asking, what can we do? How can we tell New Boston about Jesus in a way that they know that we have the support of the city, the school board, and all of the people that they look toward. We're blessed here. We've got a superintendent who has told us several times if they ever try to tell him he's got to let a girl in a boy's bathroom or a boy in a girl's bathroom, that he will hand them the keys, go out and find a truck and start driving a truck. That that will not happen on his watch. And all of our principals of all of our schools are Christian men and women. And so we're really blessed here in the area of schools. Our economic development director is a strong believer. We just had the National Day of Prayer, and they were community leaders that prayed over the areas that the National Day of Prayer involves. And so our city is blessed to have strong Christian men and women in multiple positions, not only in city government, but in the business area. Our newspaper editor is a believer. I mean, that's our community.
Well, it's a great testimony. And what would be your call, Ron, to pastors elsewhere in other cities, and cities maybe where it's not so faith friendly, and in other areas where you look at and go, boy, if I step up and run, it'll be get more opposition. What would you encourage other? And obviously, it's not calling all pastors to run for office, but there are fundamentals that we must do. What would be your message to pastors of what they need to be doing on a regular basis as far as just equipping and encouraging their people in this area?
Well, I would encourage pastors to remind their people that church life is, of course, a very important part of community life, but there is a whole nother ball game out there with church, with city government, with the business community, and to encourage them for themselves and for their congregations, to ask the men and women that are there in their churches and ask themselves, what am I called to do? What am I gifted to do? What can I, what are the gifts God has put within me, maybe outside of just being in a pulpit or leading a church? What can I do in the community that will affect the other 4,000 people in my community that aren't a part of my church? And we've got great responsibilities in leading our congregations, but that is still a small percentage of our cities. And so I would encourage them, find the place where you're comfortable. Go do what you can do. Don't look around to say what you can't do, but find what you can do and then do it. I think that Nike took their motto or their slogan from the Bible. I know I was reading in a version one day where Paul was talking to the Corinthians about their giving, and basically he just says, just do it. And so with the call that we have, and with the gifts that we have, just do it. Get out there and do it. Don't be afraid.
Amen to that. Well, and that's one of the areas we call it the forgotten ministry, because as we know through the years, we just had a meeting the other day with some leaders talking about this element dynamic that, 40 years ago when I got involved into this process and started hearing a lot more of this data and information about voting abstracts and different things. And I started hearing this number from the pastor leaders at the time, and it said half of evangelicals aren't registered to vote, and half of those who are registered don't vote at all or vote regularly, which leaves 25% of the church actually on the field participating. And that's a generalization. But what's interesting is 40 years later, when you look at those numbers now, and again, there are pockets where it's better, obviously. But when you average it out over the whole, even a state like Texas, where we have a much stronger church attending base of voters than other states might, and especially in the spring municipal elections in Texas, in these small cities where yours has been since the COVID, the turnouts are in the single digits, and we still have a long ways to go to help make sure we're equipping our people to understand that. We actually launched a program called the Institute for American Christian Citizenship about 15 years ago, and for express purpose of getting information to our immigrant pastors about how our American system works, starting with Scripture. But as we did this scriptural apologetic to explain biblically what God's purpose of government is to these immigrant pastors, began to realize at the time, most of us never learned this going through seminary either, because we all know these scriptures, but it's like George Barna once said, that's our fractured worldview. It's like having a paint by number picture without the numbers. So we have the dots, but we don't have the numbers, and we have this fragmented, broken viewpoint on this. And instead of understanding that governing is God's idea, God created the concept of civil government. It's woven throughout Scripture, and He gives us a very clear roadmap of what it's for. But the unique thing in this country is that, just like ancient Israel, before they gave their right to self-govern away in 1 Samuel 8, we have the right to self-govern, but that means that the authority from God to govern, God's authority Himself right from the throne, comes to us, the people, and we delegate it then to those who step forward like you, Ron, and say, I'm going to serve in this role. But that authority doesn't come from you, doesn't come from us, it comes from God. And when we don't wield that authority properly by voting actively, we just literally give it to the enemy. And so part of our ongoing process going forward here, and look, I think we've surely seen by now that Texas is a good, strong state in terms of our faith and values, but it's not invulnerable. And coming from what I call the heathen belt, I'm from Washington State, one of the lowest church states in the nation for decades. Can't take anything for granted down here. So that's part of our ongoing charge to the church, is saying, look, don't take for granted just because we've got a great guy like Ron in there now serving. First of all, make sure we have you covered by prayer, working alongside you, and also making sure we're working to continually cultivate others come along behind us and let God do the work through us. But just be good stewards and let the outcome be in God's hands.
Yeah, I always tell our congregation that the Secretary of State's website during voting season, you can go on there and I can find out who's voted and who hadn't. And so I'll tell them, I'll know if you voted or not, and then encourage them that they need to go vote.
That's exactly right. We have a lot of pastors of churches doing that type of thing that have measured over 90% vote turnout.
Yeah.
Because, most people want to do the right thing. And, we've all heard the various, in Texas, it's really nothing but excuses, because with early voting, there's not any, I got busy on election day. Well, that doesn't count because you had a week and a half before that. So it made it so convenient. There's really no reason at all not to. But it's just a matter of, I guess, for us, we have a unique role of voting, and reason why we vote as believers in Christ and followers of God that non-believers and those outside that parameters don't have. I mean, to them, it's a civic duty, and it's for all American citizens. But since we know that the only reason that we have all this there to begin with, and that there's an accountability factor above the Constitution that we're going to answer to one day, we have a compelling reason to do this that nobody else has. And that's one of the things that we're constantly trying to work and change in the process, not because we're trying to create utopia, but just to say, look, we're going to be faithful in doing that part of what God's called us to do. And I think what I'm encouraged by right now, Ron, is that I'm hearing from so many pastors, especially since COVID. Look, let's face it, everything has shocked everybody down to the being. I mean, I was one of those pastors in Houston that was subpoenaed by the mayor in 2014, and that shocked the country. That a mayor of a city would actually subpoena pastors for sermons and sermon materials and notes and things. But it was a little bit of a wake-up call. But COVID, when the government actually walked in and said, we're going to shut down your church, you can't do church. That was another huge call to action, I think, for the church that many are now, and a lot of realizing subsequent to that we've got to step forward and put the government back in its cage where it's designed to be, doing the things it's supposed to do. But it's never ending. I mean, just this legislative session, we literally have a bill just going to the governor's desk, and finally we're getting out of the Senate after, I think, 3 sessions, that will protect churches statewide from local city municipalities. I know you wouldn't do this, Ron, but our city of Magnolia did. They tried to offset the tax exemption of the churches and the nonprofits and the schools by tripling the water and sewer rates, and they openly said it on record. And we realized that at that time, there was a huge gap right there that left the churches of every city vulnerable, and then basically what happened was Magnolia had gotten years behind in their infrastructure planning, which a lot of small towns do. They didn't miscalculate the growth, weren't paying attention, whatever, but they tried to make up for it by going after the churches. So we're going to get a law passed in Texas this time with the help of Senator Brandon Creighton on the Senate side and Cecil Bell on the House side that will prohibit that kind of rate, what we call rate discrimination for churches. There's just little encroachments like that constantly we have to watch for as well. by government stepping into areas that belong to the church, and we have to understand what those lines are, or we can't protect them. And that's kind of part of what we're trying to do with our pastors. So, well, thank you for your service, Ron, both as the kingdom as a pastor and to the city. And we'll be praying for you. Anything we can help with, let us know. We want to keep you. We'll keep you in the loop. We actually have Pastor Ray Wilson, who's our work with the team up there, is coming down for our luncheon. Put Ray out there as our Northeast and East Texas director. Any kind of information to help with pastors, in particular, along those lines. I would love to help you there. But in the meantime, like I said, we're standing with you in prayer and appreciate your willingness to go into the firing line.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share today. And we'll be praying for the network and all that you do for the state and even reaching beyond that. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Have a blessed day.
You too.